Before you cross this threshold, stop, breathe. This is not a podcast you listen to while washing dishes. This is a descent, an initiation, a confrontation with a truth history has buried. Prepare your mind, prepare your heart. What you are about to hear is not given. It is earned. Say it aloud. I enter this house with an open mind and a steadfast will. Then, press play. The first chamber awaits.
Tonight we open a file. A truth often deliberately ignored, sometimes actively buried by political narratives. What you think you know about who genuinely belongs in the Levant, about the actual biological identity of the people there today. It is fundamentally, scientifically wrong. Throughout this journey, we rely not on vague authority, but on concrete genomic studies. Large ancient DNA surveys led by Lazaridis and colleagues have mapped the broad genetic structure of the ancient Near East. Targeted work on the Levant and on modern Lebanese was carried out by Haber and colleagues. High coverage sequencing and demographic modeling of Ashkenazi genomes was done by Carmi and colleagues. I will quote specific papers by name because the details matter. Which samples were used, which comparison panels were chosen. These choices shape the conclusions. And the conclusion is this: the very identities fighting over this land today are biologically from the exact same ancient family tree. It is quite startling when you see it laid out. So stay with me, stay until the end, because the knowledge we unlock will challenge, maybe even shatter the foundational myths that drive both sides of this agonizing conflict. Before we truly dive in, stop for a second. This is not background noise. This is material. It demands your full attention. We are about to cross a threshold where all political convenience, all historical myths dissolve under the hard light of biological and archaeological fact. This is not passive listening, it is work, intellectual labor. We are here to synthesize these studies. The archaeology, the population genetics, they all converge. They all point to this profound shared genetic heritage between modern Jews and Palestinians. That is the mission today, to confront this head on. The central idea that despite 2 millennia of social divergence, religious and linguistic splits, one group staying, one group scattering across the globe, they both share this common genetic foundation rooted deep in the Bronze Age. So the conflict, when viewed through the scientific lens, is not between strangers at all. No, it is between descendants. Descendants of the very same ancient ancestors. It is a family affair, tragically. To map this deep history, thousands of years of people moving, settling in the Levant is not simple. We must rely on a rigorous approach. It braids together genetics, archaeology, and historical linguistics. We call it the triad of genetic history. And to reconstruct this ancient DNA landscape, scientists use 3 main tools. Each gives us a different piece of the puzzle. First, autosomal DNA at DNA. Think of it as the whole picture DNA you inherited from all your ancestors, mother, father, grandparents, going back generations. At DNA is crucial for figuring out admixture, the percentages, the recipe, the proportions of ancestry from different ancient groups. How much came from Anatolian farmers? How much from local hunter-gatherers? It gives us the overall genetic recipe of a population. So at DNA is the ingredient list. But what if we want to trace a continuous family line through history, the surnames of the past? Then we turn to the specialized tools, the ones that don't get mixed up every generation. Second, mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, passed only from mother to child, exclusively maternal. It lets us trace unbroken maternal lineages back millennia. It reveals whether there was continuity or disruption in the history of women in a community. If many women married in from outside, the mtDNA signature shifts quickly. Third, and then arguably most powerful in patriarchal societies like the ancient Levant, the Y chromosome, passed almost exclusively from father to son. unchanged generation after generation, perfect for tracking patrilineal lines, confirming genetic continuity, identifying founder effects. And here is the critical point. When we look at why DNA across the Levant today, in modern Jews, Palestinians, Samaritans, Druze, what do we see? A profound sharing of specific markers, haplogroups J1 and J2, classic Semitic markers, E1B1B, with deep roots in North Africa and the Near East. These are not minor overlaps. The fact that these foundational paternal markers appear in such high frequencies immediately screams common deep history on this land. It is undeniable. That is our first great anchor, the shared paternal signature. But good science always acknowledges its limits. Ancient DNA is powerful yet imperfect. Samples often come from easily excavated coastal cities, Sidon, Ashkelon, which may not represent inland rural populations. DNA preservation is patchy. Climate and geology determine what survives, and while admixture results are consistent across studies, exact percentages vary, depending on algorithms, reference populations, and lab methods. Before we continue, let's name these nuances clearly. First, the reference population problem. We don't have DNA from every ancient group, so researchers use the closest available proxies. If the proxy is imperfect, the numbers shift. Second, algorithms differ. Admixture clusters allele frequencies, CubeADM and F statistics model proportions, haplotype-based tools like ChromoPainter estimate ancestry timing. They can yield different percentages from the same genome. Third, uniparental markers, Y and mtDNA, trace only one lineage each and can diverge from the autosomal picture. Fourth, sample sizes and neighbor choices affect outcomes. None of this undermines the science. These are the growing pains of a young field, and that is why we give caveats when quoting numbers. Now, with tools and limits laid bare, let us descend into that common foundation, the Canaanite people. This is where historical narratives buckle under scientific weight. The Canaanites are the essential substrate, the genetic common trunk. Almost all later Levantine groups, including the ancient Israelites, emerged from this Canaanite base. Not a unified empire, but a constellation of prosperous city-states. Byblos, Tyre, Sidon on the coast, Megiddo, Hazor inland. They shared a culture, a Proto-Canaanite language, and critically, a common gene pool. They were plugged into everything, the hub of ancient Near Eastern trade, the Via Maris, the maritime route absolutely central, and their cultural echo remains, not in one word, but in the very fabric of daily speech. Take the Semitic root MLK for king, Melech in Hebrew, Malik in Arabic, the word for son, Shemesh in Hebrew, Shams in Arabic, from the Canaanite root Eshem, Shem, milk, Halav in Hebrew, Halib in Arabic, from HLB. These are not borrowings, they are linguistic fossils preserved for over 3,000 years, proof that Hebrew and Arabic did not merely meet, they grew from the same ancestral tongue. Let us now get clinical. What was the Canaanite genetic makeup? We can map it as a composite built layer by layer over millennia. Layer 1, the Natufian hunter-gatherers, the indigenous people of the Levant, present before farming began 12,000 years ago, the deepest genetic bedrock. Layer 2, the Anatolian Neolithic farmers, migrating from modern-day Turkey around 9,000 years ago, bringing agriculture. Their DNA became dominant in the region. Layer 3, around 2500 BCE, a key infusion from the east. Ancestry linked to Zagros Neolithic farmers, modern Iran, and Caucasus hunter-gatherers. This correlates with the spread of Indo-European languages and, crucially, bronze-making technology. It added the final significant layer to the Canaanite identity. And here is the miracle. This ancient blueprint did not vanish, it is still here. The Sidon and Lebanon studies showed when modern Lebanese genomes were modeled using Bronze Age Sidon samples as a proxy, the best fitting model reported 93.2% contribution from that Bronze Age component, with a 95% confidence interval of 90% to 96%. This was not a population replacement, it was persistence, transformation, continuity. This 4,000-year-old biological signature appears at equally high levels in the Druze, the Samaritans, and, crucially, in modern Palestinians. This brings us to a pivotal point. The ancient Israelites themselves were not outsiders sweeping in, they were locals, or a branch of the Canaanites. But let us be historically precise. Like by the Roman era, no one really called themselves Canaanite in daily life. That term had vanished from self identification over a millennium earlier. And yet, the word never truly disappeared. It survived not as a living identity, but as a cultural and theological marker, a ghost in the archive of memory. Consider this. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus encounters a woman described as a Canaanite, Matthew 15:22. But in the Gospel of Mark, the very same woman is called Syro-Phoenician, Mark 7:26. Why the difference? Because Canaanite was the ancient biblical term, the language of the Hebrew scriptures loaded with centuries of religious meaning. For a Jewish audience, it evoked the archetypal foreigner, the idolatrous enemy of Israel. Meanwhile, Syro-Phoenician was the geopolitical label of the Roman era, precise, administrative, neutral. The Phoenicians themselves never called themselves Phoenicians. They were Tyrians, Sidonians, Biblians, citizens of city-states, not a nation. The Greeks coined Phoenikes. The Romans refined it to Syro-Phoenicians to distinguish Levantine Phoenicians from their Carthaginian kin. So yes, no one walked the streets of first-century Galilee saying, "I am a Canaanite." But the word lingered in sacred texts, in polemics, in memory. Canaanite is thus not a self-chosen identity of antiquity's end, but a retrospective label used by outsiders, Hebrews, then later Christian scribes, to frame a people through the lens of Scripture. Today, archaeologists and geneticists use it not as a claim of selfhood, but as a scientific shorthand, a way to name the Bronze Age cultural and genetic substrate that gave rise to Israelites, Phoenicians, Ammonites, Moabites, and others. People in this land called themselves Judeans, Galileans, Samaritans, or simply Israelites, even when Christian. Canaanite is a label we use today, not an identity claimed in antiquity. And that identity they forged, political, religious, would eventually give birth to a word that would change everything. The word Jew. Where does it really come from? It does not mean Israelite, not originally. It means Judahite, someone from the kingdom of Judah. After Solomon's death, 930 BCE, the United Kingdom of Israel split. North, Kingdom of Israel. South, Kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as capital. Jew is Judahite. In Hebrew, Yehudi. In Arabic, Yehudi. In Greek, Iudaios. All mean from Judah. A geographic label and not ethnic, not religious at first, just from the south. And here lies a crucial distortion, especially in French and English. In these languages, Jew is ambiguous. It can mean a practitioner of Judaism or someone whose ancestors come from the Levant, even if atheist. But in Hebrew or Arabic, precision is forced. In Hebrew, Yehudi Dati, a religious, Yehudi Leumi, a secular. In Arabic, Yehudi, the ethnicity, Mutamasik bil Yahudia, a practitioner. This linguistic blur in the West fuels the conflict. When a politician says the Jews have a right to return, he mixes religion and ancestry, forgetting that Palestinians, even Muslims, share that same ancestry. When a militant says Jews are European colonists, he confuses Ashkenazim with all Jews, forgetting that 70% of Israelis are Mizrahim or Sephardim, genetically brothers of Palestinians. The word Jew, a name shaped by history and land. Jew comes from Judah, one branch of the Israelite tree. Some branches left, they became the Jewish diaspora, others stayed rooted, and in time, throughout history, became the Palestinians. Now that we've deconstructed the word Jew, let us turn to those who never left the land, those whose DNA tells an unbroken story stretching back over 3,000 years.
by order of the Emperor and the Senate of Rome. This province is to be redefined under a new name. Judea exists no more. From this day forth it shall be called Syria-Palestina. Let the name of Judea fade, and let all nations know. Rome is eternal, Rome is supreme, and rebellion will never triumph.
An insult. We are Israelites, sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. We will never accept this name of Palestine. We will never forget who we are. No Israelite will accept this name, neither today nor tomorrow, and ever. We are the children of David, not Goliath.
This is what we shall see.
Israel! 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 Israel!
Palestine!
Hurriya! Hurriya! Hurriya!
Palestine!
Hurriya! Hurriya! Palestine!
We must confront a persistent myth, one used constantly to deny Palestinian historical connection to the land, the narrative that Palestinians are descendants of 7th century Arab invaders, relative newcomers. This narrative collapses under high-resolution genetic data. What does the science show? Genome-wide studies, including the 2024 Harvard Medical School analysis, estimate Palestinian ancestry at 81% to 87% Bronze Age Levantine. The rest reflects later inputs, often from the Arabian Peninsula or other Near Eastern sources. Earlier Y chromosome studies by Nabel et al. Showed heavy overlap with Jewish and other Levantine groups, though paternal lines alone don't define autosomal ancestry. So when we say Palestinians are about 87% Canaanite Levantine, that is shorthand for model results dependent on specific ancient proxies. This confirms profound, deep local continuity stretching back millennia. It directly links them to the Bronze Age Canaanite substrate. Genetically, they are the group that experienced the least demographic change in the region over 2,000 years. They cluster tightly with other ancient Levantine populations, Samaritans, Druze, Lebanese Christians, and they are distinctly separate from Peninsular Arabs, whose ancestry is primarily from the Arabian Peninsula itself. How so? Peninsular Arabs have a profile dominated by the Natufian hunter-gatherer component, which makes sense for Arabia, but they generally lack the high proportions of Anatolian and Zagros farmer DNA that define the Levantine genetic signature. Now, the Arab conquest of the 7th century did happen, Islam, Arabic, a new empire, but the genetic mark was modest and primarily restricted to certain paternal lines, likely reflecting migration routes and administrative centers. This was not a population replacement. In overall genetic makeup, the Arabian contribution is superficial, in 5 to 10% in isolated mountainous areas, up to 15 to 20% in coastal zones or the Jordan Valley due to early Arab garrisons, but the core 80% or more remains solidly ancient, Levantine, undisturbed. This forces a crucial distinction. Arabization was a cultural shift, not a demographic replacement. Long before Islam, Arab tribes were already part of this landscape. The Ghassanids, Christian Arabs allied with Byzantium, ruled parts of Jordan and southern Syria for centuries. The Lakhmids, their rivals in the east, ruled from Al-Hira under Persian patronage. The Tanukids in the 3rd century CE were Arab Christian tribal confederations in southern Syria. All spoke Arabic, Aramaic, and Greek. All worshipped Christ. All defended the empire's frontier. When Muslim armies arrived in the 7th century, they did not encounter strangers. They met Arab-speaking Christians, Judeans, Samaritans, and Arab tribes already rooted for generations. The revolution was not about new people arriving. It was about a new faith and a new language becoming dominant. The vast majority of the local population, descendants of ancient Israelites and Canaanites, did not vanish. They changed. They gradually adopted Arabic over centuries. Most converted to Islam, a slow layered process, linguistic, cultural, religious, not a sudden swap, and the historical record is clear. Conversion was not forced at the beginning. For the first 200 years of Islamic rule, most in the Levant remained Christian, Jewish, or Samaritan. The Arab conquerors often discouraged mass conversion because non-Muslims paid the jizya, a vital tax. Arabic spread first as the language of administration, trade, and poetry. Long before it became the language of prayer, and when people converted, it was not only for survival. Many were drawn by the spiritual appeal of Islam, especially through Sufi mystics who settled in villages, spoke local dialects, and blended teachings with familiar traditions. Crucially, indigenous elites made the shift. After their defeats against the Muslims' armies and failed to stop the invasion, the Ghassanids, once Byzantine allies, gradually converted to Islam, not as outsiders, but as locals repositioning within the new order. Their descendants became Umayyad governors, poets, generals, and still rooted in the same land. Concerning the Banu Kalb, a Christian or pagan Arab tribe in the Syrian desert, they intermarried with Umayyad caliphs and became key power brokers, not because they came from Arabia, but because they were already here. These were not foreign invaders becoming locals, they were locals becoming Muslim, while keeping their land, networks, and bloodline intact. This leads us to the clearest living links to ancient DNA, the guardians of ancient Israelites Israelite ancestry. The Islamic conquest imposed a new norm, linguistic, religious, administrative, not genocide, a cultural revolution, and it did not affect everyone equally. In Gaza, influenced by Egypt, DNA shows up to 20% Egyptian input. In Galilee, Kurdish and Circassian inputs from Mamluk settlements in the 13th century. In Jerusalem, a genetic mosaic crossroads of empires. But in the West Bank, the mountains of Nablus, Hebron, the DNA is almost intact, 85% Canaanite. These are the lands of the fellahin, traditional Palestinian peasant farmers. Genetic studies from Tel Aviv University and Harvard identify them as the guardians of ancient Israelite DNA. A fellah from a Hebron village today shares more ancestry with King David's people than with most Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula. This deep continuity of lineage is not unique to the fellahin. It extends across faiths, shaping even those who kept their Christian identity. Why are Palestinian Christians so genetically close to ancient Israelites? Because staying Christian under caliphs, Mamluks, Ottomans was an act of resistance. A choice of poverty, sometimes danger, internal marriages, closed communities to survive. Their DNA is a time capsule, not a miracle, but a survival strategy. But this identity did not begin with Christianity. Long before Islam, even before the Second Temple's destruction, people in this land, whether worshipping Yahweh, Christ, or local deities, often saw themselves as descendants of Israel. This enduring sense of descent would soon clash with imperial ambition when Rome sought not just to rule the land, but to rename it. The Roman province was not called Palestine until 135 CE. Before that, it was known as Judea, the historic land of Judah. Emperor Hadrian renamed it Syria-Palestina to erase Jewish memory, linking it to the Philistines, Israel's ancient enemies. The Philistines themselves were a seafaring people who settled on the southern coast of Canaan around the 12th century BCE, likely from the Aegean region. Their land, known in Hebrew as Eretz Pelishet, the land of the Philistines, stretched along the Mediterranean coast from Gaza to Ashdod. They were not only rivals of the early Israelites, but also enemies of Egypt, having once tried to invade it during the reign of Ramesses III. It was not a neutral term from the Israelite perspective. The Pelishtim were seen as hostile outsiders who arrived from the sea. The very name Palestine comes from the Hebrew Pelishet, derived from the root PLH, meaning to invade or to penetrate. Even in its etymology, the word carries the memory of outsiders who came from the sea, a name chosen by Rome to overwrite the native identity of Judea. Yet, for centuries after, villages in Galilee or Samaria still trace lineage to the tribes of Jacob. The genetic continuity is matched by a deep, often forgotten, historical self-awareness, one that faded only when Arabic and Islam became the new cultural framework. Consider, in the time of Jesus, 1st century CE, this land was never called Palestine. The Roman name was Judea. Pontius Pilate was prefect of Judea. Coins read Judea in Latin. Jesus and his contemporaries called it the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael in Hebrew, Aram in Aramaic. Josephus referred to it as Judea or the Jewish land. The name Palestine was imposed as an act of erasure. After the temple's destruction, Judeos shifted from geographic to religious identity. Followers of Christ called themselves Galileans or Nazarenes, but still knew they were children of Israel. Yet through these shifts in faith and affiliation, the thread of Levantine ancestry remained, connecting past and present inhabitants of the land. Now, Palestinian Muslims are not a homogeneous bloc. Some descend from families who converted 300 years ago, others from later Bedouin arrivals, others still from African or Circassian migrants. Their DNA tells a story of mixing, but the foundation remains Levantine. And then there are the Samaritans. Only 800 remain, but their DNA is nearly identical to First Temple Israelites, according to the Tel Aviv University in 2023. Why? They never left Mount Gerizim, never changed religion, but crucially, most of their Samaritan cousins did convert to Islam over centuries. Their descendants, the Muslim Palestinians of Nablus, their DNA hasn't changed, only their identity was erased. The Druze, 90% Canaanite DNA, a closed endogamous community born in the 11th century. They too are living witnesses to what Palestinians and Jews once were. Before the forgetting, staying Jewish or Christian came at a price. The Druze chose a secret faith, a closed community, but their blood never lied. Let us now highlight the genetic divide between Palestinians and Peninsular Arabs. In modern Palestinians, 41.8% Anatolian Neolithic farmer DNA, 23.2% Zagros Neolithic farmer DNA. In Peninsular Arabs, only 7.6% Anatolian or 21.2% Zagros, but up to 67% Natufian hunter-gatherer DNA. This draws a clear genetic line. Palestinians are not Arabs in the genetic sense, they are just Levantines who speak Arabic. This provides an unambiguous genetic demarcation. Palestinians are genomically Levantine, clearly distinct from Peninsular Arabs. So if the science is this clear that Palestinians are the continuous biological descendants of ancient Canaanites and Israelites, what does that mean for those who left? That is the challenge of the diaspora. Let us now enter Chamber 3, those who left.
The Israelites have dared to rise against Rome, but it is the Judeans who bear the greatest guilt. They defied empire under Bar Kokhba, spilling blood and challenging peace. By decree of the Senate and the people of Rome, Judea shall exist no more. From this day forth it shall be called Syria-Palestina. Let the name of Judea fade, and let all nations know Rome is eternal, Rome is supreme, and rebellion will never triumph.
This is our plot.
It's small, but we will make it a home.
We are finally home.
By the grace of God.
Shalom, and a blessed day to you.
Baruch haba.
לשנה הבאה בירושלים.
First, acknowledge the complexity. Jewish communities are not genetically monolithic. They are a mosaic shaped by 2,000 years among host populations, but and this is crucial, every credible genetic analysis confirms they all retain a fundamental Levantine genetic nucleus, a core signature tying every diaspora group back to the original trunk in the Levant. Let's break down the main branches. First, the Mizrahim, Jews from Iraq, Yemen, Iran, Syria, and North Africa. Genetic studies like those conducted by Behar and Atzmon in 2010 show that they have the strongest continuity with ancient Levantines. Autosomal models estimate that 70 to 85% of their ancestry is Levantine or Middle Eastern. They cluster closely with rural Palestinians and Samaritans. Their differences are mostly cultural and religious, and there's no deep biological divergence. Second, the Sephardim, Jews connected to Spain, Portugal, and North Africa. Here we see significant admixture. Their Levantine core ranges from 50 to 70%, with the rest coming from Iberian, North African, and Southern European ancestry, reflecting their Mediterranean mobility. Third, the Ashkenazim, the most complex, most debated case. High-resolution genomic studies like DAS in 2016, Shuey in 2017, and Harvard in 2024 estimate that 19 to 43% of their ancestry is Levantine, with the rest primarily Southern European. Older studies, such as Atzmon in 2010, placed it higher, 40 to 60%, due to different reference panels. This variation reflects real methodological differences. But note, the field is not unanimous. In 2013, El Haik argued for High Caucasus and European ancestry, the so-called Khazar hypothesis. That paper was widely criticized for methodological flaws. In contrast, Carmi in 2014 and Shuey in 2017 support a model of mixed Middle Eastern and European ancestry, with founder effects observed in Ashkenazim. The consensus is clear: Ashkenazim are a mixed population with a persistent Middle Eastern core. This complexity has fueled a dangerous myth that Ashkenazi Jews are basically European converts with no real biological link to the Middle East. But before we go further, we need to talk about mitochondrial DNA, because this is where things get strange. Mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, passes only through the mother. It's a pure female lineage traveling through generations untouched by fathers, and when geneticists analyzed the mtDNA of Jewish populations, they found something striking. Among Ashkenazi Jews, according to Costa et al. In their 2013 Nature Communication study, over 80% of maternal ancestry traces back to European women. No, not the Middle East. In fact, just 4 mitochondrial haplogroups account for about 40% of all Ashkenazi Jews, and what scientists call a founder effect. Behar's team at Technion, in their 2006 study in the American Journal of Human Genetics, described it as 4 founding mothers who lived in Europe around 1,000 years ago. Today, 2/5 of all Ashkenazi Jews descend from them. For Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, the data is less complete, but it tells a different story. According to Bahar et al. In PLOS 1, 2008, among Tunisian Jews, 43% descend maternally from just 4 women. Mizrahi communities, who remained in the Middle East and North Africa, naturally show less admixture with European population. So here's the apparent problem. If over 80% of Ashkenazi maternal lineages are European, how can we still speak of Middle Eastern roots? This gap has fueled a dangerous myth that Ashkenazi Jews are basically European converts with no real biological link to the Levant. So if maternal lines, mtDNA, often show European origins, how strong is the case for Levantine roots? Look to the paternal signature, the Y chromosome. While Ashkenazi mtDNA is largely European, their Y chromosomes are overwhelmingly Middle Eastern. Studies by Haber and colleagues in 2000 and Nebel's team in 2001 show Ashkenazi men carry haplogroups J1 and J2, classic Near Eastern markers, at around 38% combined, but that's not all. Another 20% carry E1B1B, also a Levantine and North African haplogroup. Add haplogroup G from the the Caucasus and Near East, roughly 10%. And you're looking at close to 68% of Ashkenazi paternal lineages tracing directly back to the Middle East. The remaining lineages, some are European. R1A and R1B account for about 17 to 20%, but even here the story is more complex. Among Ashkenazi Levites, R1A reaches 50%, yet a 2017 study found this specific R1A branch, Y219, is phylogenetically distinct from typical European R1A, pointing instead to a Middle Eastern origin. Their paternal lines cluster tightly with other Jewish groups and with Palestinians. We must also briefly touch on Black Jewish communities in showing how far this Levantine thread reaches. The Beta Israel of Ethiopia, mostly local Ethiopian ancestry, but with a 5 to 15% Middle Eastern component and suggesting ancient contacts. The Lemba of southern Africa, primarily Bantu, but a notable proportion of Lemba men carry the Cohen modal haplotype, a Y chromosome marker strongly associated with ancient Jewish priestly lineages, a direct paternal link back to the Levant and preserved across thousands of miles. This underscores the power and persistence of that original Levantine Y DNA signal. What strikes me is this: the genetic thread connecting an Ashkenazi family in Poland, a Mizrahi family in Baghdad, and the Lemba in South Africa. It is ultimately the same ancient Canaanite seed DNA that also rooted the Palestinians firmly on that land. We have now established it. The people who stayed and the people who traveled are fundamentally biologically linked in branches of the same tree. This forces us to confront the truly tragic implications of this shared ancestry. Let us now enter Chamber 4.
זוהי זכותו הטבעית של העם היהודי להיות ככל עם ועם עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. לפיכך נתכנסנו אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. ותוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל. מתוך ביטחון בצור ישראל הננו חותמים בחתימת ידינו לעדות על הכרזה זו.
גם אני אצא מפה הוא לא יחזור, אז מה?
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
We have arrived at the point of synthesis, the fourth chamber, the scientific revelation and genetic brothers. When we combine the deep continuity of Palestinians from Chamber 2 with the retained Levantine core of the Jewish diaspora from Chamber 3, the political narrative of separation of two unrelated peoples with mutually exclusive claims becomes biologically unsustainable. How close are they scientifically? Geneticists have a tool to measure genetic closeness. It's called FST. Think of it as a distance score. The smaller the number, the closer two populations are. According to Kopelman et al. In their 2009 study published in BMC Genetics, when you compare Mizrahi Jews with Palestinians, the FST sits between 0.02 and 0.08, extremely close. When you compare Ashkenazi Jews with Mizrahi Jews, it's 0.006 to 0.015, still small on a global scale, but noticeably larger. What this means, Palestinians and Mizrahi Jews are genetically closer to each other than Ashkenazi Jews are to Mizrahim. The European chapter left its mark, but it didn't erase the Levantine foundation. Let me be clear, a Jew whose ancestors stayed in Iraq may be genetically closer to a Palestinian farmer from a nearby village than he is to a Jew whose ancestors moved to Poland centuries ago. This is the inescapable biological implication. The European admixture in Ashkenazim creates a quantifiable distance, separating them more from continuous Middle Eastern populations, Mizrahim Palestinians, than those groups are from each other. This biologically invalidates the notion of two hermetically sealed, unrelated peoples. They are, in the strictest sense, estranged brothers, branches of the same family tree that took vastly different paths. Let us use the olive tree metaphor once more. Imagine the genetic history of the Levant as a single ancient olive tree, and the trunk, the Canaanites and early Israelites, the branches that stayed, ancestors of modern Palestinians, roots deep in original soil, highest proportion of Canaanite Israelite DNA, but leaves and flowers transformed, adopting Arabic, Islam. The branches that traveled, ancestors of the Jewish diaspora, migrated to distant lands, mixed with host populations, but meticulously preserved the original sap, it's the core religion, cultural memory, and critically is those paternal Y-DNA markers tying them back to the trunk. So if they are biologically so close, the branches of the same tree, how did two groups so intertwined by blood become so fiercely opposed? The answer lies in double amnesia. First, the amnesia of the state on the ones who called themselves Palestinians. The long process of cultural Arabization led to a collective forgetting of their own deep biological and historical connection to the ancient Israelites. They adopted a symbolic lineage tracing back to Ishmael, the ancestor of Arabs in Islamic tradition. But here is the unbearable irony revealed by DNA. Palestinians are biologically the direct descendants of Isaac and of Jacob, who was renamed Israel. Their blood carries the lineage of King David, King Solomon, the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah. Jesus of Nazareth himself was one of their own, a Judean Israelite born among ancestors who never left. When they claim Ishmael as forefather in this conflict, they unknowingly deny their own royal and prophetic heritage. It is not a rejection of faith, it is a tragic forgetting of blood. Ishmael is the uncle of Israel, by the way, not his brother. Second, the amnesia of the returned victim. The narrative often associated with modern Zionism, the emphasis on Jewish indigenous return often overlooked the inconvenient fact the Palestinians already living there were the other major branch of that same family, the Israelites who never left. By omitting this, the narrative became returning indigenous people versus foreign settlers, but the deeper reality is closer to a family dispute. Thus, the fundamental struggle is not the theological framing of Isaac versus Ishmael. Scientifically, historically, it is far more tragic. It is Isaac versus Isaac, or Israel versus Israel. Israel is the name that God himself gave to Jacob. The Palestinians, demonstrably the primary biological heirs of the ancient Israelites who stayed, find themselves in conflict with other heirs of Israel, the returning Jews of the diaspora, fighting over a land that is biologically their shared ancestral inheritance. The question shifts entirely, not who has the exclusive right to this land, but how can the estranged descendants of Isaac and Jacob learn to share their common ancestral home? When viewed this way, the conflict is biologically paradoxical. It is a fratricide. Every victim on both sides carries elements of the same ancient ancestral legacy and the same blessing encoded in their DNA. The conflict is fueled by narratives of absolute difference. While the genetic data screams shared origin, you have journeyed through these chambers. You now carry this knowledge, both a profound burden and a profound power. Three scientific truths are unequivocal. One, a substantial shared Levantine genetic heritage binds Jews and Palestinians, rooted in Bronze Age Canaanites, visible in shared paternal lineages, J1, J2, E1, B1b. 2. Political myths of exclusivity collapse. Palestinians are not foreign Arabs. Ashkenazi Jews are not foreign Europeans. The genetic evidence refutes both. 3. The divergence is recent. Cultural, religious, linguistic differences are built upon a single ancient biological foundation, and one part stayed, one part dispersed. The root is the same. Use this knowledge not to simplify politics, for it is not simple, but to grasp the devastating, intricate complexity of the human story in the Levant. This shared ignorance, this double amnesia, is what allows the struggle for exclusivity to continue. So I leave you with this final thought. If both groups were to officially acknowledge and truly internalize this scientifically verified shared Israelite lineage, what political narrative used to justify exclusion, displacement, or violence could possibly survive the weight of that shared truth? A profound question indeed. Thank you for joining this episode of House of Agnesio. Reflect, digest, and when your thirst for truth is renewed, we will be here.
Every stone in Judea bears the same secret. The Palestinian plows the land of his royal ancestors while cursing their name. The Jew prays at the tomb of his prophets while denying their blood flows in his neighbor's veins. Look at the anonymous graves on both sides. Soldiers fallen for Zion or Philistine. Children buried under bombs or rubble. Elders extinguished in bitterness. All carry in secret the same blessing engraved in their DNA. Blessed be Abraham through Isaac. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Every Israeli victim is a grandson of David, slain by his mother. Every Palestinian martyr is a daughter of Rachel, stabbed by her brother. The earth drinks a sacrilegious blood, the blood of Isaac, shed by Isaac. Abraham watches from the field of Machpelah. Sarah weeps in the cave of the patriarchs. Rachel sobs on the road to Ephrath. But the most heart-wrenching cry rises from the well of Beersheba. It is the voice of Isaac, aged and weary, watching his sons slaughter his grandsons while invoking his name. Woe to those who light the fire. Woe to the stirrers of discord who know this truth, but bury it under flags and ideologies. Woe to the manipulators who stoke fraternal hatreds to serve their ambitions or their dogmas. Woe to the guardians of silence who suffocate reconciliation. For it is written, woe to him who sows discord among brothers.